Welcome to the Organized Investor Podcast with Jerry Goodman and Megan Hubbard from Tennessee Wealth Management. Think of these pod classes as a college of knowledge, and the curriculum is an inside look at how we work with our clients to organize their investments, their retirement, and their affairs. Our process is certainly not the only approach, but it has served our clients well. Listening may materially improve your life as well, but for that to happen, it also takes an open mind, an interest to learn, and your trust in what we're sharing. We focus only on what is relevant and will explain things several times in different ways over multiple classes to ensure you understand their importance. We suggest you subscribe so you'll receive reminders about the next class. And with the tools and information on our website, theorganizedinvestor.com, you can start getting organized right now.
Welcome back, students, to what is our 21st pod class and the 15th in a series on the subject of organizing your investments. We've been deposing Jerry Goodman in recent pod classes as he's explained the goal of materially improving the long-term financial future of his clients using a dividend growth strategy. He shared the impressive rates of return that have averaged 14.06% per year for 84 accounts over the 5 years ending January of 2024. He's also been repeating this message to listeners because it took him about 6 months to realize just how much potential this dividend growth strategy can actually have. I'm Megan Hubbard, and I'm a former first grade teacher at the Christian Academy of Knoxville, and I'm also the question asker. If you've been listening, we add lots of ers to the end of asker because it just seems appropriate.
7, I think.
Yeah, well, I'm giving up with the counting. I'm just going to say several times.
Okay.
So that's what we're doing for this discovery process. As the question asker, I get to ask all the questions. And according to my mother, Jerry Goodman, he is my dad. He's actually the deponent in this deposition, also known as the question answerer. That might have been one.
Excellent. No, I think you got them all.
Okay. Well, we're super glad you're here, and your role is to actually decide if the comments and the evidence in these proceedings is truthful, compelling, and believable. Okay. So here we go. Hear ye, hear ye. Court is still not in session, so you still don't need to rise. But Mr. Dad, you're still sworn in. So since we've already done that, you've pled guilty to repeating yourself, and you must understand the seriousness of these proceedings because you've even cut back on your jokes.
It's been a struggle. And I'm still going to tell the whole truth and still nothing but the truth. And I think a lot more jokes if I really actually didn't get so many questions from the question asker. Anyway, that's the way it is.
I know. It's tough to be funny and answer serious questions at the same time, right?
Well, and it's hard to be cool when you're sitting on the hot seat in here.
Dun.
Yeah.
There you go. There's your first one. You've already worked one in.
Well, that was just more of a play on words, but anyway.
Mm-hmm. Well, in terms of the hot seat, in the last 5 episodes, you've done an excellent job of harping on your whole dividend growth strategy to make sure it sinks in for everyone. But as the question asker, I've decided we need to plow a new row in the cornfield by talking about some other things. Okay, I'm getting tired of hearing you talk honestly about the same thing over and over.
And
so listeners probably are too.
Cornfield reminds me of that old show Hee Haw, which some of you remember. Fortunately, some of you won't. But anyway. Well, just because we spent 2.5 hours about this repeating stuff, we spent 2.5 hours over the last 5 pod class explaining the most successful investment strategy of all times, at least in my mind. That really doesn't mean we actually bored somebody to death, does it?
Well, as far as we know, nobody died, but who knows? But how about you share with us the story about Bruce that attended one of your estate planning workshops. In fact, this is episode 21, and I don't think you've ever mentioned Bruce.
Oh, yes, Mr. Bruce, one of our favorite clients. And I would just say he's an excellent example of probably 80% of everything we've ever covered in some of these pod classes. I mean, it kind of covers it all. So, Megan, you've met Bruce. Where do we start? There's so much to say.
Well, here's a novel idea. How about at the beginning when you first met Bruce, you could start there.
Mhm.
So where did that 80% of everything we've ever covered come from, though?
It was an educated guess. Well, and actually, have you ever heard that expression that 87.2% of all statistics are made up? Okay. But anyway, I don't make up a lot, but that one I kind of had to, because I would just say 80% of the important stuff. Okay. And for about 5 or 6 years, ago, we were conducting an organized investor workshop. It was at a local country club. And probably because we were serving dinner, we had a room full of people. There was probably 20, 25 people. It was a lot.
That's a pretty big crowd.
Well, it really is.
Dinner.
Well, it was. We got, I don't know how we picked out the food, but particularly when the dining room is not very large, that is a lot of people. And what we were discovering was probably identical to what we're covering in all these pod classes, which is organizing your investments, organizing your retirement, and your affairs. Pretty much those three same topics.
Well, and you told me once that the 20-minute video that I created for our website, that it's virtually the same information as well. I think you've shared that before on this podcast.
It's pretty accurate. Now, and some of you will look at the 20-minute video and say, God, that's a lot of information for a video, but it's still about a third of what it would be, in person. So that is correct. Again, the big difference is the actual workshop, again, would take an hour and a half, 2 hours, because we were serving food. And this was obviously before COVID, made its little debut back in 2020. So people were really more willing to venture out in the public and go out and hear a message and get out of the house for a few minutes. And we encourage podcast listeners to actually watch that video that Megan just mentioned, just referenced to, because it is a very concise and to the point explanation of many of the many ways we can actually help our clients.
Well, I will say, though, having created the video myself, if I'm comparing these pod classes to the actual video, I would say, wouldn't you agree that we're probably covering a lot more information and really in much more detail than we actually did in that video?
Absolutely. We are. And we're also repeating this to a degree on a lot of times, because sometimes you may not listen to every pod class. Someone may not sink in the first time. And we've said this, from time to time when we did our first pod class until now. Not only has our message evolved a great deal in terms of what we're talking to the listeners about, but also how we're explaining this. Okay. For example, we've never compiled the average rates of return for our 190 advisory accounts until January of 2024, about 6 months into starting these pod classes. And being able to share that type of information makes it super easy for somebody to see the possibilities of what we're doing, just to compare it to their own situation.
Well, and for someone who didn't hear my dad here harping on that in pod classes, gosh, it would have been 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20, he made sure you understood the potential that exists with this dividend growth strategy.
Mm-hmm. And anyway, so we got a little off track here. We're going to start talking about Bruce, and we're talking about the pod classes. But in these workshops that like we met Bruce, we talk about, again, investment planning, retirement planning, estate planning, all of those three kind of categories. And we would give everybody a 3-ring binder. And coincidentally, it was called the Organized Investor Workbook because it was the Organized Investor Workshop. And it was just chock full of all this information that we were talking about, so they could actually have something in their hand and take it home and review it if they wanted to.
And just so you know, as a listener, you too can actually have a copy of that same workbook if you're brave enough to sit down for a chat with us. So just know we do give out party favors at meetings with us.
That is correct. And that little job of printing those up is one of the best things I've ever delegated to you, Miss Question Asker. Anyway, that particular workshop was actually a lot of fun because I think we actually served cocktails, which put everybody in a really good mood. That always helps to get them in a festive mood, doesn't it?
You served alcohol at the event? I wasn't at this one.
Well, not me. I mean, we had servers though that did, and and since they had a bar, I'm pretty sure they had a liquor license for all the stuff they were served. But anyway, so after the workshop was over, we'll kind of move on with this. I had a man by the name of Bruce Go figure that, because that's who we're talking about. He approached me as I was leaving. Actually, as he was leaving, and he said something like, "Okay, I'm looking for a way that my financial advisor, my tax advisor, and my legal advisor, they can all know each other and talk to each other and kind of help me out, so I don't have to be involved in some of this stuff." And he said, "I have some pretty complicated stuff." And he actually really did. It was kind of a lot going on. And he wanted those three advisors to communicate with each other and really just kind of come back and say, "Hey, Bruce, here's what we're seeing. Here's what we think you ought to do," and talk with him about that, and kind of cut out some of this middle conversation that was always going on with him and his other people.
Well, and I've heard this story before, but share with the listeners, how often does someone want to do that? And, have that legal and that tax and that investment advisor work together.
It's surprising. It's really not that often. And I think it's because people already have maybe their estate planning's already taken care of and they're not thinking about that. Or someone's already doing their tax return and they don't want to change that, which is fine. The reality is we can work closely, with someone's current CPA. It doesn't matter. I mean, they don't have to change that person. We can have a communication with someone's estate planning attorney if something needs to be addressed in that regard. So but it doesn't really come up in that holistic, here's what I want to do kind of request that came out of Bruce's mouth.
Well, but from what I know about Bruce, he needed to get his estate planning in order, right? And
Yep.
He was actually fine with switching to a different CPA, and he wasn't married to his current advisor either.
Exactly. So as quickly as I could reply to him, as also have 20 other people leaving the room wanting to say bye to me, I said something like, "Hey, Bruce, we can absolutely do this, but we need to sit down and have a chat and look at your complicated stuff, see whatever you have going on. We can figure out how to make this work." And we did.
Now, if you haven't heard us mention this, Jared Hubbard, that's my husband, same last names, he's a practicing CPA, bless his heart. That's all I can say. That's what we say in the South when we feel badly for somebody.
Thank God he's willing to do tax returns, because it's not me.
Right. And thank God I don't have to ever do my own tax returns.
As long as you don't have him knocked off or something, as long as he's still kicking. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's what we refer to in our office as the tax department team. He loves it. So he was obviously part of, your 3-person solution, I would assume, to help Bruce with this grand plan, correct?
Exactly. But the story. Where was Jared working 5 or 6 years ago when I first met Bruce?
Well, oh yeah, I know, because I was married to him. He spent most of his hours there. He was a tax partner actually at Roeder for Moss here in Knoxville. And, he didn't leave his practice and join us until, I guess it was early 2021.
I think so. That sounds like the correct year. So, and that was fine, because even though Jared's office was 8 miles away from us, he was still able to help Bruce with his tax return, and Jared and I certainly know how to get in touch with each other, and have a discussion or something in reference to Bruce. So that was fine. Even though he wasn't here, it still was a solution.
Okay. So that's the tax piece of the puzzle. But what about the estate planning piece of the puzzle? Who's that?
This may not sound, logical or whatnot, but I'm going to say it. The estate planning is really the easiest part of all this, because really in terms of most people, it's pretty cut and dried once they kind of think through what they want to do. Okay. And frankly, once everything is in place, a lot of it's just some paperwork and making some decisions about who gets what, who does what, that sort of thing. Sometimes it may go for years and not really need any kind of adjustment or editing. Okay. Unless someone passes away or there's a big change. So what is important is to make sure that the assets are properly titled, along with the beneficiary designations. Those also need to be correct after all these documents have been created. That's one of the most important parts of this.
Okay, so not to get completely off topic here, but in pod classes 4, 5, and 6, you actually explained how we can help someone, work with a local estate planning attorney for a flat fee that would actually save them about $1,000 versus working with a local attorney directly.
We did, and as we can help, we can also help with these housekeeping steps. We do this. There's no cost. There's no obligation to do any of that.
So did Bruce have estate planning on his to-do list?
He did. And, and since his situation was more complicated than the average person that comes through the door. I mean, it was more complicated than most. But along with more, also we had more things to do because he had more things going on. He probably saved maybe more than that $1,000 with this flat fee planning approach that we took him through, as opposed to just going to see an attorney and working with them, being charged by the hour. So he probably had saved more than $1,000 for his situation.
Hopefully you're enjoying this Organized Investor podcast with Megan Hubbard, the Dean of our College of Knowledge, and Jerry Goodman, her CFP dad. Check out our class notes to find out how to reach us and subscribe to our pod classes to get started.
So if you've been listening, you know that we have said in a couple of different of our episodes of our pod classes that estate planning is important, but from a financial perspective, it's not where the real benefit actually is, at least for most people, that is.
That is so true. And what's crazy is that people will come to the estate planning workshop and they're all excited about getting the documents done, which is fine. But then we kind of share with them there's something more important, and sometimes it takes a little time, a little repeating to that to sink in. So Bruce, he's really we're just going to refer to Bruce as the perfect example, okay? So after we sit down, he gives us all of his information, and it took an hour or two to kind of go through and make notes about this and that and what was going on and what needed to be done. You explained everything to us. Again, it took a while. Then we entered everything into our fancy smancy little computer in order to give him a good summary of where he was, what he understood he wanted to do, and kind of how are we going to do this? How are we going to kind of work all this out?
So is this the same thing as the portfolio insight example that we have on our investments page of our website?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. But that's not the only thing that needed to be explained, because we were kind of rolling in beneficiaries and assets and how they need to be transferred at some point. So it was kind of 2/3 what you referred to about portfolio insight, maybe 1/3, a letter of engagement with a local attorney, that sort of thing. So that was a big part of it.
So you were explaining like risk, cost, returns, things like that.
Yeah. In terms of the investment side of this, yeah, it was a lot of things, because Bruce really had most of his investments. They were with one investment advisor group that was out of state, along with a variety of other kind of holdings that were just sort of, left out there, kind of being ignored or whatnot, that maybe weren't even being overseen by anybody. So it was really a rather complicated assortment of things that it just didn't seem to have a lot of coordinated approach to the whole portfolio. It's kind of a little bit of this, a little bit of that, without any kind of theme or overall process that seemed to be followed.
So what would you say the single biggest surprise was that you found out when you were working with Bruce on all of this?
Give me the biggest surprise
that Bruce
had?
Yeah.
Without a doubt, it was the single biggest surprise with how much money we could save him. Okay. And let's just say Bruce's total portfolio, this is kind of vague, but I'm going to say it was close to $5 million. Now, much of it was in mutual funds, mutual fund advisory accounts, things like this. It wasn't just all in one thing. It was kind of spread around, but let's say it was $5 million.
So spread over a lot of different things.
Yes. And I explained to Bruce that changing from like the mutual fund advisory account to our dividend growth account, this strategy that we use, would reduce his advisory fee and that we charged by about 1/4 percentage point. Okay, from what he was being charged to what we were going to charge, it was going to drop at about 1/4 point. And even more surprising was that several of his accounts, they didn't even need to be an advisory account, so the advisory fee could be eliminated altogether.
So in terms of just fees, what did he actually save?
You're going to think I'm making this up, and I'm not. And I remember, this is one of the few things that I remember, and it saved Bruce, and I told him this, it was going to be $9,800 per year. That's per year. And the only reason I can happen to remember that was it was $200 short of 10,000, which, 10,000 is kind of a big number, but I thought, crap, it's not 10,000, but it's close. It's $200 short of that. And keep in mind, this is just from the reduction or the elimination, if you will, of the advisory fees that he was being charged by this other advisory group.
Wow, that's a big number. That's a trip, a really nice trip somewhere.
Yeah.
So
and a couple of visits to the mall too.
Well, yeah, I guess it depends on how spendy you are at the mall. But what was his reaction, Bruce's reaction?
Well, it's such a big number. I remember it very well. He said, "Jerry, there's no way that's possible." So what we do, we went through every single account one at a time. And I showed him, this is what you're being charged in this first account. This is what you're being charged in the next account, and the next account, the next account, and so forth. Okay. We went through every single one of them one at a time. And I explained just how much the advisory fee could either be reduced or even just eliminated altogether, and added it up for him. It took a few minutes, but it was really pretty obvious.
So, I know the ending of the story. He obviously believed you because he's been a client for many years, right?
He did. And, he didn't believe it until we actually showed it to him in black and white on the statements that he gave us. And now let me just say, Bruce is super smart. He's very intelligent. He's very good at math. But that wasn't the problem, okay? This whole investment world has kind of had a little mind of its own, if you will. And he didn't understand some of the fees and what was supposed to be the reasonable and what was possible and could they be reduced and blah, 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 blah. He had trusted his long-term advisor that he thought had been looking out for him. But from my perspective, that wasn't the case.
So all the $9,800 was just from either reducing or eliminating advisory fees, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Which is only a small part of the whole thing.
Okay. So what do you mean when you say some of these accounts shouldn't have even been an advisory account, that's being charged a fee? What does that mean?
We don't see this a lot, but on occasion, we will find somebody that has investments that they've owned them forever. Okay. They don't have plans to sell them, ever get rid of them. So there's no reason to be charging somebody an annual fee if it's just going to sit there and you're just kind of looking at something. That's really kind of, I don't know, inappropriate or unconscionable. So that's what we refer to when we see stuff like that.
So you've said a lot about the advisory fee that you charge and that it's usually about 0.25% lower than other advisors.
Mm-hmm. And we happen to know that because there's 15,000 advisors that work with our clearing firm, Wells Fargo Clearing, and we charge, based on what we charge, it's about 0.25 point less than what that 15,000 advisor group charges from that standpoint. So yes, if you can reduce the advisory fee or maybe eliminate it altogether on several $1 million of investments, look, that's how you get to $9,800 per year in savings. Now, we like to use the term extrapolate, if you spread that out over, say, a 20-year period, that's equivalent to almost $200,000. And that's if you don't even assume any kind of appreciation on the assets. That's just saying $9,800 per year times 20 years. And that advisory fee, again, I said this a moment ago, that's just a small part of how we can materially improve someone's overall financial future. In this particular case for Bruce, it was a chunk of change.
So what else did Bruce learn?
Well, next we showed him the internal cost of the mutual funds that he owned in some of these accounts, and also what the mediocre performance he had gotten from them. And frankly, this is even more financially beneficial than just reducing the advisory fees, okay? And that's because getting rid of mutual funds, which will not only help you avoid the internal costs of these funds that are buried inside of those funds, it may actually improve the performance by being more selective with your investment, okay? Not just owning everything in the market.
So you've spent a lot of time on this in earlier podcasts. And, what can you say about how this was going to benefit Bruce?
Bruce had some mutual funds in his account. He also had several mutual fund advisory accounts where they managed it for you with mutual funds and where they were charging a fee to manage all of this. So, I'm not going to go back and start naming the funds and the historical returns of those funds and blah, 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 blah. But I will remind listeners that we've covered mutual funds, and in particular, these mutual fund advisory accounts. We talked at this at length, and it was in pod classes number 8, 12, 13, and 17. I had to go back and research them because, we've done these over time, but we've covered this a lot.
Yes, I remember the discussions about owning, 15 to 20 mutual funds that may have 200 stocks each, which actually means, you've gone from diversification to diversification.
Exactly.
Because you own virtually every stock on the planet now.
Yeah, you really do. And to remind the listeners what we consider to be mediocre performance, we'll once again use the mutual fund advisory program that's available through our clearing firm. It's called FundSource as an example, okay?
So let the record show that on the investments page of our website, there is a quarterly performance report of the FundSource aggressive growth model. And, if you look at the one dated March 31st of 2024, you'll be able to see what we're speaking about.
So yeah, and we have a lot of information there. So look for the one March 31st. That's the most current. Now, that summary for fund stores, page 5 shows the 5-year track record of that strategy, which is 8.94%. However, that's before any type of an advisory fee has been deducted. So what's the advisory fee? Let's just assume, to make this kind of simple, let's assume that the advisor is going to charge a 1% advisory fee to help you with this. Okay. If that were subtracted, that would bring that 5-year net return down to 7.94%. So from 8.94 to 7.94 if you reduce, say, it by 1% advisory fee. That makes this kind of comparing apples to apples. Now, as we've covered in several pod classes, and in particular in 11 and 12, our 5-year net rate of return through January of 2024 on the advisory accounts that we manage was 14.06%. Okay, that's the net return. Now, we will admit that we're comparing the fund source to our results with a slightly different ending date, okay, maybe like 2 months different. But our 14.06% performance is 77% greater than the 7.94% performance of fund source. So yeah, it's a couple of months difference, but that wouldn't make a difference of 77%.
I mean, you've said yourself before that differences like this are, big enough to drive a truck through them.
Yeah. I mean, you could probably drive 2 trucks through this. Now, I don't know, what Bruce would have made from his mutual fund advisory strategy that he had originally been invested in, but I will share the fact that his 5-year net rates of return from what we've done for him with our dividend growth strategy, they're actually in that 14% range per year that is the average for our entire group of clients. That's how he's done.
So I know from experience, that Bruce is a very happy camper, but just how much better off is he financially because of all of these changes that you have helped him implement?
I really can't answer that. I mean, I'd have to go back and do a lot of research, and it would still be kind of an educated guess. And since all that past performance, there's no guarantee it's going to be that way for the future. I really can't say, but I'll say he's done very well.
Well, so let the record show that you have repeatedly stated your goal is to improve the overall performance of your clients by 2% per year, which is, I think, a very reasonable and great goal. And you went on to say that, for $1 million portfolio, that's actually equivalent to an additional $20,000 per year, or, $400,000 over 20 years, if you look at it that way.
Right. It is. And when you look at that kind of number per year and you go, that's a lot of money. So thanks for the reminder about that. And keep in mind that Bruce's entire portfolio, it wasn't all invested in either mutual funds or in a mutual fund advisory account. There was other things in there. But the point is that he has materially improved his long-term financial future. That's either going to help, him personally to, take more trips or have more fun or do whatever, or it's going to flow down to his family. And maybe Bruce may leave some of it to a charity as well, but he's financially better off and has more ability to do things while he's still walking around on this earth.
So Bruce, he started off wanting his legal, tax, and financial advisor to all communicate and talk to each other. And what did he actually end up with?
He ended up with exactly that, because you have Jared. I think Jared, your husband. He now does Bruce's tax return, and he literally can print off Bruce's 1099s and his tax information from our Wells Fargo database, because he's doing the tax return, and we also have the investments here. And in fact, Jared and I, we may discuss a situation, maybe come back with some single recommendation that even includes the tax consequences for Bruce. And we also have the assets that are all titled, based upon his estate planning documents to make sure that they're the way they're set up. So the beneficiaries are properly designated. So we have either a power of attorney or some sort of transfer on death on the account is another form of a beneficiary. All that's in nice order because we know how the estate planning documents are set up, because we helped him to get that done too.
And, don't you keep a, running history of what each of you have done for the account? Because this is a pretty complicated situation. For Bruce, yes, we do. I mean, there's so many accounts here, and they're just the way they were structured. It's not like his fault. It's just the way it ended up. We actually want all these advisors communicating with each other, but we even have documented all this, with a kind of running Word document that kind of covers everything year by year.
And when all this started, he wasn't even asking about how can I improve my performance, but that's what he got. It was kind of like the icing on the cake. So he started off wanting one thing and he got all of that, but he's also made a lot more money. He's been much more financially successful.
So you would agree with the statement that Bruce is a happy camper.
Yeah. Maybe he's going to be a happy camper in a big, motorhome or something. But yeah, from a financial perspective, we have lots of happy campers because we're using that same dividend strategy that we use for Bruce, for the vast majority of our clients, and the same sort of strategy that we've been harping on this, podcast after podcast after podcast.
I mean, Bruce could go glamping instead of camping now that you've saved him money.
Yeah, or he can always just get a room at the Four Seasons.
Well, that's what I would do. I don't think I'd just cut out the camping and the glamping and just go big or go home.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, so remind us, who are these podclasses actually for?
Much of this sounds kind of odd. It is for the benefit of the family members of our current clients. And you may go, that seems kind of weird, but that is really for two reasons. Okay. Our clients have family members. Everyone has different configurations of family, but those two reasons. One, it makes for a much smoother transition sometime down the road when this family member is going to become a beneficiary. Okay. And so they kind of understand what's going on and we kind of make sure everything's in order. But it also allows them to benefit from all this information, that we're sharing with and working with on their parents. It can help them right now, not 20 years down the road when all of a sudden they become a beneficiary.
Okay. So I know we probably have some listeners that are not clients. So if, someone's not yet a client, how can we help them?
Listen to the approach, listen to what we're talking about, and sit down for a chat with us to see if working together, it sounds kind of corny, but if working together might be a good fit for everybody. And it's not just for the listeners, it's for us too. We have to feel like your situation, we can help, that we can be an improvement, and work well with you and make a better result for your situation, whatever it is.
So as usual, we've covered an earful in this podcast, and we will continue to depose Mr. Dad in the next episode to hear who knows what. But is there anything else we need to cover before we take a recess for the day, Mr. Dad?
Well, as usual, I know the main reason that listeners are here is they want to have us talk about how the rates of return that we've shared are for informational purposes and that past performance is no guarantee of future results. How exciting is that?
Oh my goodness. I just can hardly wait till we get to this part of the podcast every time.
Well, yeah.
Well, so we've heard this from you before.
And you're right. But it'll be the last time you're going to hear it in this podcast. And that's true. And the returns for each of these client accounts, they also are based upon the client's individual circumstances, such as, when they started the account, how much money have they put in, when did they take it out, what the investment objectives were, et cetera, et cetera. So it includes that too.
Anything else?
The rates of return for our advisory clients, not clowns. Yeah.
We do not call our clients clowns, by the way.
Let's rephrase that. Our advisory clients, they're all compiled from a month-end performance report for each of those 190 accounts, respectively. And it's basically way too much information to put on the website in any sort of understandable format. So we are, however, happy to sit down and share a lot of this boring documentation for somebody that might be brave enough to want to take a look at it and really see that, yeah, it does exist. This is how how much money these folks have made.
I'm just going to say for myself and all the listeners, though, we do appreciate you not going through all 190 accounts on the podcast here.
Oh, you're welcome.
And actually also for not telling any jokes in this part of your deposition. You did a really good job.
Not one? I thought I snuck.
Oh, yeah, you did in the very beginning.
I try to sneak something in.
Well, listeners, please feel free to contact us with any questions you may have, or, if you have some good jokes and you want to share those with my dad so he can get a different repertoire of jokes, that would be great.
A lot of my joke content comes from Reddit, if you've never heard of that. Like that's where I'm going to spend some time. If I ever retire, that's where I'm going to go spend most of my quality time.
That's what you're doing in retirement.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's my long-term plan.
Perfect. Well, be sure to follow us on social media, such as YouTube, LinkedIn, X, which I still try to call Twitter, and save us to your favorite podcast player to actually receive the reminders of our future episodes. We have more to share, which means you have more to learn. So join us next time. And as always, thanks for listening. And this podcast is dismissed, recessed, and adjourned until next time.
Half-Life.
The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of the organized investor or TN Wealth Management. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Opinions expressed are subject to change without notice and are not intended as investment advice or solicitation for the purchase or sale of any security. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning or before making any investment decision. And please consult legal or tax professionals for specific information regarding your individual situation. The organized investor cannot accept trade or account instructions on or through this platform. Please contact us directly at contactus@tnwealthmanagement.com or 865-415-2060 to place a trade or for trade or account-related questions. Brokerage and advisory services are provided by TN Wealth Management through Prospera Financial Services, Inc., member FINRA SIPC. The organized investor is a brand name operated by TN Wealth Management for educational platform purposes.